It started with something small, a missed exam. Emily Reyes, a sophomore majoring in psychology at Western Pines University, was supposed to be in room 4B of the Behavioral Sciences building at 9 a.m. sharp for her cognitive development midterm. She was the kind of student who always arrived early, sometimes clutching coffee she barely drank, her notes highlighted in 3 colors, her name etched neatly at the top of every page. That morning, her professor noticed the empty seat. He assumed she'd either overslept or was struggling with something emotional. He knew about the breakup. By mid-afternoon, the exam was turned in by everyone but her. No message, no email, no explanation. But still, no one panicked. Not yet. Her roommate, Sarah Lynn, wasn't worried at first. Emily had been distant over the weekend, quiet but not unusual for someone going through a breakup. Her long-term boyfriend, Josh Keller, had come by the dorm the Thursday before, and they'd had a long, whispered argument in the hallway that ended with Emily crying alone in the stairwell for nearly 20 minutes before slipping back into their room. Sarah had tried not to pry. That Saturday, Emily barely left bed, scrolling through her phone silently, headphones in. On Sunday, she skipped dinner, and by Monday morning, her side of the room still looked lived in. Blanket twisted, textbooks open, phone charger coiled next to her pillow. Sarah assumed she'd just gone out early or was hiding out in the library. But when she got back from her afternoon lecture and saw Emily's bed untouched and her phone still plugged into the wall, a strange silence settled into the room. By now, Emily should have texted back. She hadn't. Sarah sent another message, then 2 more. No reply. She called. Voicemail. Then again. Still voicemail. That evening, when she noticed Emily's jacket still hanging on the back of the chair, the one she wore everywhere, something shifted. At 6:12 p.m., Sarah walked down to the lobby of Chamberlain Hall and told the front desk assistant that her roommate hadn't come home, hadn't answered her phone, and hadn't posted on social media all day. The attendant logged a welfare note but didn't escalate it. Students missed class all the time. Maybe Emily needed space. Maybe she was staying with a friend. At 7:43 p.m., Sarah called Emily's parents. Her mother answered on the second ring. The sound of panic moved through the line like static. Emily had not spoken to either of them since Friday. By 8:15 p.m., campus police had been contacted, and an officer was dispatched to Chamberlain Hall. They knocked, looked around the dorm, asked a few routine questions, took down Emily's full name and student ID, then left with the promise that they'd follow up if anything turned up. It didn't feel urgent. There was no sign of forced entry, no blood, and no indication of foul play. Just absence. Sarah spent the night texting mutual friends, refreshing Emily's last seen on apps, and rereading their last messages. Nothing stood out. Nothing answered the question quietly growing in the pit of her stomach. The next morning, Emily's bed remained untouched. Her backpack, which usually leaned against her desk chair, was gone. But her phone was still there, and that didn't make sense. Emily didn't go anywhere without it. At 10:17 a.m., a second report was filed, this time by Emily's RA. That escalated things. Campus police returned, this time searching the room more thoroughly. The window was locked. The door showed no signs of tampering. They pulled swipe card data, which confirmed Emily had entered the building the night before she went missing. But there was no record of her ever leaving. Detectives later described that dorm room as a snapshot, a moment frozen in time, seemingly paused mid-thought. On the desk sat a half-drunk bottle of iced tea, beside it a printout of her exam schedule. Her laptop was shut but still warm. A library receipt was tucked between the pages of a textbook. Her roommate remembered the soft sound of the bathroom door closing around 8:30 p.m. the night before. She hadn't heard it open again. That night, Emily Reyes simply vanished, and no one, not her roommate, not her professors, not her parents, not even the boy she had loved and broken up with, could explain why. Over the next 48 hours, as missing posters went up around campus and whispers turned to worry, investigators started building the last known picture of Emily Reyes. What emerged wasn't the image of a student overwhelmed by midterms or a girl off blowing off steam. It was something quieter, slower, a slow-motion unraveling that most people only began to recognize once she was gone. Emily had been dating Josh Keller, a junior majoring in business administration, since the start of their freshman year. Their relationship had begun the way a lot of campus romances do, quick, intense, and all-consuming. But according to friends, by the second semester of sophomore year, it had become something else entirely. Something messier, something darker. Emily's close friends, the ones she studied with and occasionally opened up to during late nights in the dorm, recalled months of subtle shifts. She started withdrawing from campus events. She stopped going out on weekends. She dropped her spot on the psychology club's mentorship team, a role she once said meant everything to her. One friend said it felt like Emily was slowly disappearing even before she vanished. She'd stopped wearing makeup, stopped making plans, and every time Josh's name came up, her face tightened just a little, like something clenched behind her eyes. The breakup happened on a Wednesday, 5 days before she disappeared. According to text records later pulled from her phone, Emily sent Josh a message that afternoon at 2:14 p.m. It read, "We need to talk. I can't keep doing this." At 2:16 p.m., he responded, "Come. Over then?" She did. Surveillance footage shows her entering his off-campus apartment building at 2:42 p.m. She left at 3:38 p.m., walking fast, head down, arms wrapped around herself despite the late spring warmth. There was no footage of what happened inside. Neighbors later told police they heard shouting, not violent, but tense. One described it as low-grade emotional warfare. Josh told investigators that the breakup was mutual, that Emily had calmly said she didn't want to continue the relationship, and left. He said they hadn't spoken since. He seemed, on the surface, composed, unbothered. But when detectives asked about his whereabouts the night Emily vanished, the details became fuzzy. He claimed he stayed in, played video games, and had a few friends over. When asked to name them, he paused. Then he rattled off 3 names, 2 of whom later said they weren't with him that night. The third didn't respond to calls. Emily's roommate, Sarah Lynn, was the first to notice something was wrong in the days after the breakup. That night, Emily had come back from Josh's apartment and gone straight to bed. No music, no phone calls, no venting. Just silence. On Thursday, the day before she disappeared, she missed both her morning and afternoon classes. When Sarah returned from her lab around 5, Emily was still in bed, headphones in, laptop open, but paused on a blank Word document. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't showered. When asked if she was okay, Emily offered only a nod and mumbled, "Just tired." That night, around 8 p.m., Emily left the dorm. She was wearing her blue hoodie, the one with frayed sleeves she never let anyone borrow, and black leggings. She didn't take her phone. She didn't bring a bag. Campus security footage picked her up walking across the East Quad at 8:14 p.m., heading toward the library. That was the last verified sighting of her. No one saw her leave. No camera picked her up again. Her ID card wasn't used to enter the library. Her phone remained plugged in beside her bed, untouched. Her side of the room stayed exactly the same. Investigators immediately flagged Josh for follow-up. When asked again about Thursday night, he repeated that he had stayed home. But this time, he added that he'd tried texting Emily and never heard back. Detectives obtained a warrant for his phone records. What they found shifted everything. Josh had sent Emily 4 messages between 10:20 p.m. and 2 a.m. on the night she disappeared. The first read, "So this is it, huh?" The second, "You're just going to ghost me like a coward?" The third was shorter, "You'll regret this." The last was a missed call at 1:47 a.m., which Emily never answered. Emily's friends began providing more context. One said that, a week before the breakup, Emily confided in her that Josh had started showing up places unannounced, the dining hall, her lectures, even study groups. "He just appears," she had said, "like he's watching." Another friend remembered walking with Emily across campus late one evening when Josh suddenly appeared behind them, asking who she was texting. She had laughed it off at the time, but now looking back, no one was laughing. There were no formal complaints filed, no restraining orders, nothing documented. But the emotional profile building around Josh Keller painted a picture that was harder to ignore: jealous, controlling, short-tempered, obsessively attached to a girl who had finally decided to walk away. On paper, he was just an ex-boyfriend. In reality, he may have been the last person to truly understand how vulnerable Emily had become. By Sunday, the search for Emily expanded to include wooded areas surrounding the campus perimeter. Police dogs were brought in. A public statement was made. Volunteers were organized. Meanwhile, investigators pulled more digital data: location pings, swipe card logs, and social media DMS. Everything pointed to a narrowing window between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m., the night she vanished. A window where Emily Reyes walked into the dark with no phone, no backpack, no witness, and no way to call for help. And somewhere in that hour, something happened. At 8:42 p.m. on the night Emily Reyes vanished, her student ID card was swiped at the main entrance of Chamberlain Hall. The timestamp sat neatly in the campus access log, an unremarkable digital trace, one of thousands generated daily by the university's card reader system. But this one mattered. It placed her definitively inside the building. The security camera above the entrance confirmed it: grainy footage showing Emily in her hoodie, head down, hands in the kangaroo pockets, stepping inside without hesitation. She didn't look back. She didn't pause. It was familiar ground. She'd walked through that door hundreds of times. But what makes that frame haunting is what comes next, or what doesn't. She never walked out again. Investigators reviewed the building's camera system for hours. Chamberlain Hall, a co-ed residence housing nearly 120 students, had cameras covering all main entrances and exits, as well as the lobby, elevators, and hallways of each floor. Emily's swipe and entrance were captured, but after that, nothing. No footage showed her walking to the elevator, no hallway clips of her approaching her room. Her door, room 317, had no separate camera. No one could say with certainty if she ever made it back to her bed that night. More troubling was what the system didn't record: any exit. Emily's keycard wasn't used again after that 8:42 entry. That alone wouldn't have raised concern. Students often stayed in for the night without leaving. But the absence of any video showing her departure raised more disturbing questions. Officers double-checked the data. They interviewed the residence manager, the front desk assistant, and custodial staff. Nobody remembered seeing her after that time, and no one saw her leave. It was as if she'd walked in and disappeared between floors. Police began mapping possible explanations. Could the camera system have glitched? Maintenance logs showed no malfunctions that week. Was it possible she slipped out in a crowd, her face hidden, unnoticed? Unlikely. The entrance doors required individual card swipes. There was no surge of students exiting around the time she would have had to leave. One officer floated the idea that she might have exited through the west stairwell, a service door that had been propped open multiple times before for food deliveries and late-night smoke breaks. It was one of the few access points not covered by video. That west stairwell became the first real lead. Officers inspected the door and found faint smudges on the push bar, possibly from someone exiting without gloves. Fingerprint dusting revealed overlapping prints, none of them conclusive. There was no camera inside the stairwell, and though it opened to a side alley behind the residence hall, the exterior camera facing the alley had been offline for 6 days. A support ticket was filed, but no one had fixed it. The building's security system had a literal blind spot, one that suddenly meant everything. Investigators began interviewing students on floors 2 through 4. Some remembered hearing the stairwell door slam that night, but no one saw who used it. A few thought they had heard footsteps around 9 or 9:15, maybe someone in a rush, but the sounds weren't unusual enough to draw attention. Emily's roommate Sarah had fallen asleep early and didn't notice anything. She assumed Emily had come in, grabbed something, and gone back out. But why would she? Her phone was still on the charger. Her laptop is open on a blank Word document, her purse untouched. All signs pointed to her coming back expecting to stay. Yet something, investigators theorized, must have changed in the brief window between 8:42 p.m. and the stairwell door slamming sometime after 9. Either she left suddenly, Or she never had the chance to. A new possibility emerged. What if she never left on her own? Officers began considering the idea that Emily could have been led, or forced, out. Without cameras on that side stairwell, there was no footage to confirm or disprove it. Detectives requested a full list of students living in Chamberlain Hall. One stood out immediately: Josh Keller, Emily's ex-boyfriend. What campus police hadn't known was that Josh's best friend, Tyler Vance, lived in room 112B on the first floor, 3 doors from the west stairwell. Josh had stayed there before. A lot. He knew the building, he knew the exits, and he wasn't on any footage from that night. Tyler claimed he hadn't seen Josh in days, but texts told another story. At 7:52 p.m. on the night Emily disappeared, Josh sent a message. "Still good for tonight?" No reply. Then, at 9:06 p.m. Heading there now, investigators subpoenaed Josh's phone. Records. His GPS signal went dead at 8:59 p.m. It didn't ping again until 12:47 a.m. 3 hours and 48 minutes of total silence. Not once had his phone been offline that long in the weeks prior. That gap mattered. It overlapped perfectly with the window in which Emily vanished without a trace. Investigators began rechecking timestamps. What if Josh had entered through the west stairwell? What if he'd waited? What if Emily had come back to grab something from her room and never made it upstairs? Detectives returned to Chamberlain Hall with cadaver dogs. They searched the stairwells, the boiler room, the storage closets, anywhere someone could have hidden. Nothing. No blood, no fibers, no signs of struggle. But they weren't ready to rule anything out, because one fact still remained. Emily Reyes walked through that door at 8:42 p.m. The cameras caught her, the logs confirmed her, and after that moment, she was never seen again. At first, Josh Keller's story seemed almost routine. When investigators asked where he was the night Emily Reyes vanished, he didn't hesitate. He said he'd stayed in his apartment, played games online, and gone to bed around midnight. He mentioned a few friends who were supposedly online with him during that window and gave their names casually, as if none of it mattered. For a day or two, the answer seemed to hold. But then investigators checked. The first friend said he hadn't been on at all that night. He was out with his girlfriend. The second had briefly logged in but didn't recall seeing Josh online. The third never responded. That was the first crack. And once that crack formed, it widened fast. Josh's phone records were next. The carrier provided tower logs, ping data, and message history. What stood out immediately was a gap. From 9:10 p.m. to 12:47 a.m., there was no signal. His phone wasn't just idle, it was completely offline. Prior to that night, Josh's phone had never gone dark for more than 15 minutes at a time, not even while sleeping. It was always pinging, texting, scrolling, and with location services active. But that night, in the same 3-hour window that Emily vanished, his digital footprint disappeared. Detectives brought him in for a formal interview. They didn't mention the phone records at first. Instead, they asked him to walk them through the evening again. Josh repeated his story. He said he played Xbox. He said he was home the entire night. He said he didn't text Emily again after their breakup. His voice was level, his posture relaxed. But when one of the detectives slid a printout across the table, an image of a time-stamped message he'd sent at 10:23 p.m. that read, "You'll regret this. I swear." The color drained from his face. For the first time, he didn't have an answer ready. That message had been deleted from his device, but it still existed in the cloud backup. It was one of 3 texts Josh had sent Emily after their breakup that he'd attempted to erase. The first had come 2 nights before she vanished. "You think you can treat me like this and walk away?" The second, "You don't know what I'm capable of." The third, and most disturbing, had come hours before her disappearance, and the words were unmistakably threatening. Josh's demeanor shifted quickly. He went from casual to defensive, asking if he was being accused of something. Detectives didn't answer. They just asked where he'd been between 9 and midnight. Josh said he didn't remember. Said maybe he went out for a walk, maybe to clear his head. He couldn't be sure. He said the deleted messages were written in anger, but that he never meant them. He said he was hurt, emotional, just venting. But his explanations kept changing, and the timeline only grew darker. Security footage from the parking structure behind Josh's building showed his car leaving at 9:12 p.m. He hadn't mentioned driving anywhere. The car returned at 12:43 a.m. There were no confirmed stops in between. No traffic cams caught him, no tolls, no purchases, just 3.5 hours of silence. And when investigators asked where he went, Josh paused for too long before finally muttering, "I don't know, I just drove." Forensic analysts combed through his vehicle the next day. They found nothing overtly incriminating, no blood, no fibers, no sign of a struggle. But the passenger seatbelt had been fastened during the trip. That detail mattered. Josh always drove alone. Friends later confirmed he was obsessive about keeping the passenger seat clear. No bags, no food, not even his gym duffel. The idea that someone else had been in that seat the night Emily disappeared shifted the investigation into a more focused lane. Josh's behavior in the days following Emily's disappearance also raised concern. He never joined the search efforts, never reposted the missing person flyer, never reached out to her friends or family. He remained silent on social media, except for a single tweet posted Friday afternoon. "Sometimes people leave. Doesn't mean it's your fault." It wasn't directed at anyone, but the timing was impossible to ignore. Investigators circled back to Tyler Vance, Josh's friend who lived on the first floor of Chamberlain Hall. Tyler initially claimed he hadn't seen Josh that night, but under pressure, he admitted that Josh had texted him asking if the west stairwell was still open. That message was sent at 8:50 p.m., just minutes before Emily entered the building. Tyler didn't reply. He said he didn't think much of it, but it placed Josh's attention directly on the one entry point Emily could have exited without being seen. Josh Keller was no longer just the ex-boyfriend. He was now the primary person of interest in a missing person case that had gone from worrying to chilling. His alibi had collapsed. His phone had gone dark. His words, those deleted messages, painted a picture of someone volatile, someone angry, someone who hadn't accepted the breakup at all. And whatever had happened between 9:10 p.m. and 12:47 a.m. on April 21st, it was something Josh didn't want anyone to know. As the investigation into Emily Reyes's disappearance entered its second week, detectives began looking beyond the physical evidence, beyond phone logs, security footage, and digital trails, and into the world Emily kept to herself. With consent from her parents and a warrant issued under exigent circumstances, police were granted access to Emily's university counseling records. What they found inside those files reframed everything. Emily hadn't just been upset about a breakup. She'd been afraid. Deeply, privately afraid. And she'd been trying to manage that fear alone. Emily had started counseling the previous semester, registering under the university's mental health outreach program. Her initial intake form listed anxiety and stress as her primary concerns. But by the third session, things had shifted. According to the therapist's notes, Emily described feeling like she was walking on eggshells constantly in her relationship. She mentioned that her boyfriend, unnamed in the early records but later confirmed to be Josh Keller, would criticize what she wore, who she talked to, and how long she stayed out. It was never physical, but the emotional control was there. Constant check-ins, guilt-tripping, and sudden mood swings. One line in the note stood out: "He doesn't hit me, but sometimes I wish he would. At least then I'd know it's real." In one of her final sessions, held just 3 weeks before she vanished, Emily had told her counselor she was considering ending the relationship. The therapist wrote that Emily appeared anxious, fidgeting constantly, and kept checking her phone during the session. When asked why she hadn't broken up with Josh yet, Emily's answer was quiet, almost inaudible. "Because I don't feel safe if I do." She described past incidents where Josh had shown up unexpectedly, outside her lecture hall, her study group, and even outside her family's house during a weekend visit. He never threatened her directly, but his presence always came with an edge. She called it being watched without being touched. One session detailed a recurring nightmare that had plagued her for months. In it, Emily described being trapped underground, buried alive, screaming, unable to move or call out. She said she could feel someone walking above her, pacing, aware she was there but choosing not to help. The therapist noted how vivid her description was, too vivid to be just symbolic. Emily had cried during that session. She said she didn't know how to get out and didn't know who to tell. Her roommate had noticed her sleep-talking more often. She'd wake up breathless, sometimes clutching her pillow like it was the only solid thing left in her world. Detectives followed up, with the university therapist directly. The therapist remembered Emily clearly, quiet, polite, never disruptive, but always carrying something heavy in her voice. She said Emily never explicitly said Josh had harmed her, but everything she described, the anxiety, the isolation, the hypervigilance, painted a profile of someone experiencing emotional abuse, and more than that, someone who feared escalation if she tried to escape it. She was trying to survive the ending, the therapist told them, not just process it. Emily had also discussed a growing sense of paranoia in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She believed someone had been following her between classes. She thought she heard footsteps behind her late at night, but every time she turned around, no one was there. She told her therapist she'd stopped taking certain routes on campus, changed her routine, and even started wearing baggier clothes to feel less visible. She didn't want to be noticed. She wanted to disappear, just not in the way she ultimately did. A disturbing entry dated just 9 days before she went missing revealed Emily had started writing a just-in-case letter on her laptop. She never printed it, she never sent it, but she told her therapist she felt like she needed to leave something behind, something that would explain it all if something happened. Detectives requested a forensic review of her hard drive. While the original file had been deleted, digital forensics later recovered partial fragments of the document. The contents weren't complete, but one line was repeated across multiple drafts. "If I'm gone, please look at him." The emotional weight of these records hit investigators hard. Emily had been sounding the alarm in whispers, afraid to scream. She had tried, in her own way, to document what was happening. But without visible bruises or explicit threats, no one could see the full shape of her fear. And now, that fear had taken physical form. She was missing, her phone untouched, her belongings left behind, and the one person she feared most still walking free with no confirmed evidence tying him to her vanishing. As the investigation deepened, detectives began operating under a new assumption: that Emily Reyes didn't simply disappear. She was erased, slowly, over time, by someone who made her world smaller and smaller until she had nowhere left to turn. Someone she feared so much she couldn't even name him directly in therapy. Someone who had a reason to silence her when she finally chose to leave. And if that fear had manifested into something real, something irreversible, then the clock was no longer just ticking. It had already passed the hour. The wooded area behind the Western Pines football stadium wasn't considered a high-risk zone. It was a patch of overgrowth where students sometimes jogged or took shortcut trails back to the residence halls, just far enough from the main road to feel quiet but not remote enough to seem dangerous. Emily Reyes had run there before, early mornings usually alone. Her smartwatch logs from the prior semester confirmed it. But after she vanished, no one had thought to search it initially. There were no signs pointing there, no camera footage leading in that direction. But on the 10th day of the investigation, a handler with the cadaver dog unit suggested they try anyway. Not because of a specific lead, but because sometimes the process requires checking everything, even the places that feel too familiar to matter. The first sweep produced nothing. Then, midway through the second pass, one of the dogs, a German shepherd named Scout, stopped moving. His nose locked on a specific spot just 20 feet off the edge of the trail, a shallow patch of soil, slightly disturbed, partially covered with pine needles. The officer holding the leash called it in, and within minutes, the area was marked off. What they found in the underbrush wasn't a body, but it was enough to raise alarms. A torn piece of fabric, badly weathered, tangled around a low branch. Blue cotton, frayed sleeve. A match for the hoodie Emily was last seen wearing. They called in the forensic team. The fabric fragment was photographed, bagged, and rushed for DNA testing. But it wasn't just the sleeve that raised questions. Nearby, in a patch of flattened grass and turned soil, an investigators found fresh tire impressions, narrow, shallow, and pointed directly toward the trail access opening behind the stadium. They hadn't been there long. Based on the condition of the ground and recent rain patterns, the tracks were likely no more than 11 days old. That put them squarely inside the timeline of Emily's disappearance. Less than 15 feet from the tire marks under a thin layer of leaves, a cracked plastic phone case was recovered. It was bright purple with 2 missing rhinestones along the edge. Her roommate Sarah later confirmed it belonged to Emily. She had dropped it once, cracked the corner, and always said she'd replace it but never did. The phone itself was not inside. It remained back in the dorm, still plugged in. But the presence of the case out here, miles away from where she was last seen, suggested something had happened, something sudden. Investigators carefully mapped the scene. The tire marks led in from the access road and veered slightly right before abruptly ending in a semicircle, like a quick stop or sharp turn. The flattened brush around the marks told a story of weight, pressure, something heavy pressing down. There were no footprints, no blood, but there were drag marks, subtle, uneven, pushed into the soil and running perpendicular to the path. It wasn't clear if they belonged to Emily, but they were human, and they didn't lead away. They just stopped. Crime scene technicians collected soil samples, hairs tangled in the brambles, and a partial fingerprint lifted from the inside of the phone. Case. It wasn't a match to Josh Keller, but it wasn't a match to Emily either. It was unknown, someone not in the system, for now at least, but the find was enough to shift the focus of the investigation. This wasn't just a disappearance, it was a probable abduction. Detectives traced the access road leading to the woods. It connected to a rarely used maintenance route that fed into a gravel service lot on the east end of campus. Security cameras didn't cover that area. It was known to be a blind spot. Several students admitted to parking there illegally in the past, especially during football games. But on the night Emily disappeared, no parking citations were issued, no security checks. The lot was empty when officers canvassed it the following morning, but by then, it had been almost 2 weeks. When Josh was questioned about the woods, he initially claimed he didn't know the area well, but text records showed otherwise. Months earlier, he and Emily had exchanged messages about jogging routes. One message read, "Woods behind the stadium is peaceful but sketchy after dark. Be careful." She replied, "Only go in daylight." Promise investigators confronted him with that. His expression didn't change. He said he had forgotten, said they hadn't gone jogging together in months. But the timeline didn't lie. The evidence recovered from the woods wasn't enough to confirm what had happened, but it shattered any notion that Emily simply left on her own. A torn hoodie sleeve, tire tracks, drag marks, and a phone case buried in leaves told a darker story. A story of interruption, of struggle, of someone making a decision on the edge of campus and executing it in the space of minutes. It also narrowed the window of opportunity. Whatever had happened to Emily likely happened between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m., and whoever was responsible knew where to take her without being seen. The scent trail stopped there. The cadaver dogs couldn't go further. There was no confirmed sign of a body, but the area had given up one truth. Emily Reyes had been there, and the place she'd once called peaceful had turned into the only physical evidence of her last known movements. Investigators regrouped. Their theory evolved. They weren't just looking for a missing person. They were now hunting a crime scene in progress. In the third week of the investigation, as tips slowed and public pressure mounted, investigators returned to one place that hadn't yet been fully explored, Josh Keller's apartment building. It wasn't new. It had been built in the late 1980s, updated in sections and barely maintained in others. He lived on the second floor, in Unit 2C, a one-bedroom with beige carpet, an old air conditioning unit in the window, and no sign of forced entry or immediate evidence of foul play. It had already been searched twice. His car, his bedroom, and even the dumpster out back had been examined, photographed, and cleared. But something about the building itself still felt off, and it started with a passing comment from the property's only full-time maintenance worker. He told investigators that about 2 weeks earlier, on the Monday following Emily's disappearance, He'd been doing routine landscaping near the rear vent system when he noticed a strong chemical odor, bleach specifically, coming from the grate near the base of the old laundry chute. The scent was sharp, almost painful in the nose, and lingered even after he walked away. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Residents occasionally cleaned with heavy-duty products, and the basement level had been sealed off years ago due to mold issues. But now, with Emily's case growing colder by the day, that detail took on a different weight. The basement hadn't been used in years. Officially condemned for resident access, it was padlocked from the stairwell and marked with a paper sign that simply read, "Closed until further notice." But when detectives checked the lock, they found it intact, but recently oiled. No dust on the handle, no cobwebs where there should have been plenty. That alone was enough to justify a search warrant. And when they returned with one, what they found beneath the building made everything else, every warning, every suspicion, feel like they had been circling the truth all along. The basement was cold, damp. A narrow corridor ran beneath the units, with exposed piping lining the ceiling and thick concrete walls sweating from years of condensation. The old laundry room sat at the far end. Most of the machines had been removed, save for a few rusted dryers and one broken industrial washer. But it wasn't the machines that caught their attention. It was the furnace behind them. Tucked into a corner, shielded by piping and a stack of broken tiles, it looked like a forgotten fixture. But behind it, stuffed into the small crawl space between the furnace and the wall, they found the first physical evidence directly tied to Emily Reyes. Charred fabric, partially melted synthetic material, and singed hair had been hastily shoved into a blackened trash bag that had itself started to degrade. Forensic technicians cataloged the contents immediately. Among the items, fragments of a hoodie sleeve, a melted zipper pull, and a few strands of brown hair fused into the lining of what appeared to be athletic leggings. The air reeked faintly of old chemicals. There were no traces of blood, no flesh, no bone. But the degradation suggested an intentional effort to destroy evidence. The items were sent to the lab. Results were returned 3 days later. Mitochondrial DNA extracted from the hair match samples taken from Emily's personal items. The clothing was consistent with what she'd last been seen wearing. It was her. There was no longer any ambiguity. At some point after she vanished, a portion of her clothing had been brought here, hidden, burnt, and then left in a room that no one was supposed to enter. The question now wasn't if she'd been harmed. It was how far someone had gone to erase what had happened. Josh was brought in for questioning again. This time, the evidence spoke first. When shown photos of the burnt material, his face didn't react. No denial, no visible panic. Just silence. He asked for an attorney, and the interview ended. But the damage was already done. The apartment complex now shifted from a neutral location to an active crime scene. Search crews moved in. They brought in cadaver dogs again, searched the furnace's vents, scanned the pipes for trace blood. Everything that could be tested was tested. In one corner of the laundry room, a piece of drywall had been replaced recently. The paint didn't match. It had been covered with boxes, but when removed, the repair stood out clearly. Investigators knocked it through. Behind the wall, in a gap between insulation and concrete, they found an empty duffel bag, a small container of lye, and a bottle of industrial drain cleaner. The label had been partially torn off, but the chemical composition was unmistakable. It was the same type of product that could be used to destroy organic tissue. None was left, no remains, no fluids. But the presence of these materials narrowed the possibilities. This wasn't a panicked cleanup. It was calculated. Time-consuming. Someone had taken steps not just to hide Emily's presence, but to dismantle any chance of reconstructing what happened, and they had done it in a location no one would think to check. A locked room, a forgotten basement, a furnace nobody used. And still, fragments remained, clues that survived fire and time. The forensic evidence was damning, but incomplete. There was no direct link tying Josh's hands to the burnt items, no prints, no DNA. But the proximity, the motive, the lies, the behavior, the pattern, it was tightening. Piece by piece, the image of what happened to Emily was sharpening, and the story was no longer just about a girl who disappeared. It was about a man who may have hunted silence, buried it in flame, and thought no one would ever look underneath the furnace. But they did. As the investigation entered its fourth week, pressure on law enforcement was no longer just public. It was personal. Emily Reyes had become a name spoken in dorm lounges, lecture halls, and faculty meetings. Her face was printed on every light pole within 2 miles of campus. Her story was everywhere, except where it mattered most. On record, with proof, with resolution. Josh Keller had remained out on bond, never charged but under constant scrutiny. His behavior in the days following the discovery in the basement had grown more calculated. No statements, no public presence, no response to media. His attorney issued a brief statement calling the evidence circumstantial. But detectives weren't done. When officers executed the second search warrant on Josh's apartment, they took every remaining electronic device, including an old desktop computer tucked beneath his desk. It wasn't plugged in, looked outdated, covered in dust, but something about it made the lead tech pause. The serial number revealed the device hadn't been used in nearly a year, officially. But the registry logs told a different story. It had been powered on 2 weeks earlier for exactly 41 minutes. The exact window investigators believe Emily disappeared. The desktop was encrypted. The hard drive had been partially wiped, its partitions rewritten with random filler. Whoever had used it didn't just want to delete files, they wanted to bury them. But the digital forensics team brought it in anyway. Over 3 days, they slowly reconstructed fragments of lost data using a series of recovery protocols designed for counterintelligence work. On the 4th day, one folder stood out. It was labeled simply, "Final Hour." The folder was nearly empty. One video file, badly corrupted, no file extension. The audio header was damaged. The visual frames were fragmented, but the team recovered 68 seconds of partial playback. It was enough. The footage opened inside a car, Josh's car. The frame was off-center, likely recorded from a suction-mounted dash cam or phone bracket. In the faint glow of the dashboard, the date and timestamp blinked. April 21st, 2023, 9:26 p.m. The image was unstable. The sound was intermittent. But then, unmistakably, Emily's voice broke through the static. She was crying. Not quietly. Not the kind of crying you do when you're upset or exhausted. This was panicked, frantic. She screamed for help, her voice cracking from the strain. Her arms appeared bound, her face only visible for a moment in the rearview mirror, red, blotchy, terrified. She called his name once, Josh, then pleaded with someone not to do this. There was movement beside her, something blurred, then a loud thud as the vehicle made a sharp turn. Her body jolted sideways, then the screen went black. The clip stopped. There was no ending, no location, just a frozen timestamp in 68 seconds that redefined the case. Investigators replayed the footage dozens of times, frame by frame. The interior matched Josh's car exactly. The fabric pattern on the seats, the worn tear in the headrest, even the faint reflection of a dashboard ornament that one of his friends later confirmed had been hanging there for years. It was enough to establish context, time, and location. And most importantly, it placed Emily, alive but restrained, inside Josh's vehicle nearly 45 minutes after she was last seen entering Chamberlain Hall. Armed with the footage, detectives obtained a warrant for Josh's arrest. He didn't resist. He said nothing when they arrived. He sat quietly in the back of the squad car as cameras snapped his picture from behind the tinted glass. At the precinct, he remained silent during booking, silent during the first round of questioning. His attorney advised him to say nothing, and he obeyed. But the video changed everything. Prosecutors now had visual evidence of abduction, emotional distress, and premeditation. The timeline had solidified. Emily hadn't simply walked off, she had been taken, and now they could prove it. When confronted with the footage during the second interview, Josh stared at the screen in silence. He didn't ask what it was, didn't deny it was him. He just watched. And when it ended, he didn't speak. But a faint twitch moved through his jaw, visible only for a second. His attorney ended the session early. But investigators didn't need his confession. They had hers. Her final moments, her panic, her voice cracking through the static, the sound of a girl who knew she wasn't going home. The recovered footage was later enhanced using video interpolation, sharpening the frames and improving the lighting. A court-appointed forensic expert authenticated the file. Jurors would eventually see it in trial. But even before the courtroom, even before charges were finalized, those 68 seconds became a ghost. Not just to the investigators who watched it alone in a dark room, but to every person who had searched for her, prayed for her, and hoped for something different. Because now they had seen her last known moment, not walking across campus, not scrolling through her phone, but trapped, crying, and completely alone. The breakthrough came unexpectedly in 2023, nearly 2 years after Emily Reyes vanished without a trace. The investigation had gone cold, the fragments of a corrupted video file titled "Final Hour" sitting in digital limbo, their images blurry and incomplete, the haunting sounds of her panic reduced to static. But forensic technology had evolved. A new AI-driven video restoration technique promised to recover lost frames, enhance degraded pixels, and reconstruct damaged footage in ways once thought impossible. Police cyber experts worked relentlessly to apply this emerging technology to the fragment of footage they had, footage that captured Emily's last known moments. When the enhanced video finally emerged from the haze of corrupted data, it did not just clarify what happened. It tore through the silence that had shrouded the case for so long. The once grainy, fragmented image transformed into a painfully vivid scene. In the backseat of a car, illuminated by the dull glow of the dashboard, Emily's face came into sharp focus. Her eyes were wide with terror, darting from side to side as if searching for a way out. Her lips moved slowly, deliberately. Though no sound accompanied the video, the lip movements were unmistakable. She was mouthing a single desperate word: "Help me." The rawness of her silent plea echoed through the room where detectives watched, breath held, hearts heavy. The timestamp flickered on the screen. April 21st, 2023, 9:26 p.m. The night she disappeared. Josh Keller's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his face barely visible in the shadows. The vehicle moved steadily through a narrow, rough dirt road bordered by dense forest. The camera angle revealed little of the outside, but a faint glimpse of tree trunks rushing past suggested they were deep in the wilderness, far from the bright lights of Western Pines University's campus. Emily remained restrained, her body shifting slightly with the turns and bumps of the road. The camera jerked occasionally, as if mounted on a suction cup or phone holder struggling to hold steady. The clip ended abruptly after just over a minute, the screen cutting to black and then freezing on the final frame of Emily's terrified eyes. The police seized on the GPS metadata embedded in the footage, a digital breadcrumb that traced the exact route the car had taken. It led deep into a remote forest area on the outskirts of the campus, a place largely forgotten except by a handful of locals who used the area for hiking and off-road driving. Officers mobilized quickly, coordinating a ground search with GPS coordinates in hand. The forest was dense, the ground soft with years of pine needles and fallen leaves, muffling footsteps and swallowing scent trails. But the investigators were relentless. The search team soon discovered a disturbed patch of earth, the soil freshly turned and broken, disrupting the natural pattern of the forest floor. It was just off the dirt road, in a small clearing surrounded by thick brush and towering trees. Nearby, the scent of chemicals, bleach and something sharper, more acidic, lingered faintly in the air. Cadaver dogs alerted strongly, their noses tracing to a specific spot beneath a thin layer of leaves and broken twigs. As forensic teams carefully excavated the area, they uncovered remnants of charred clothing, fragments of fabric matching the color and weave of the hoodie Emily had been seen wearing in the recovered footage. There were also small shards of a sneaker sole and tiny bone fragments. The scene was grim and silent, the forest seeming to hold its breath. Samples were meticulously collected and sent for immediate testing. Mitochondrial DNA analysis, the method used when only degraded samples remain, confirmed the remains were indeed Emily's. The discovery devastated the community and reignited the investigation with renewed urgency. For Emily's family, it was the final confirmation of their worst fears, a cruel closure amid months of uncertainty. Their public statement reflected their pain and gratitude. Emily was our shining light. Though her life was cut short, we are thankful for those who never stopped searching, never stopped fighting for her truth. Law enforcement's understanding of the timeline sharpened. The video and the discovery in the forest aligned perfectly. The chilling footage recorded just before the abduction and the clearing where her remains were found, telling the story's tragic conclusion. This evidence painted a horrifying picture of Emily's last hour. A desperate cry for help trapped in pixels, a frantic journey through dark woods, and a final resting place hidden beneath earth and leaves. With this pivotal breakthrough, prosecutors gained the most damning evidence yet against Josh Keller. The digital confession in pixels, paired with the physical evidence unearthed in the forest, dismantled any defense built on doubt. Josh's silence in custody grew heavier. The weight of the evidence closed in around him, leaving little room for escape. Yet, even as justice moved closer, the community grappled with a profound grief. Emily's story, once a tale of hope and youth, had become a tragic caution, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath ordinary facades and the silent screams that often go unheard. Her final, whispered plea for help, etched into the corrupted video restored by technology, would linger in the memories of those who sought to protect her and those who vowed to uncover the truth. Emily Reyes's remains were recovered after an exhaustive and heart-wrenching search that extended well beyond the initial investigation's scope. The location, a secluded clearing deep within a dense forest bordering the university, became the somber site of a grim discovery. Beneath layers of plastic sheeting and a thick veil of ash, forensic teams carefully unearthed the remains, piecing together fragments of a life so cruelly and violently ended. The meticulous effort to erase her existence was evident: charred clothing, scattered bones, and remnants that bore silent witness to the brutality inflicted upon her. The layers of ash told a story not just of destruction, but of desperation, a calculated attempt to obliterate any trace of what had happened. The community that had once rallied with hope found themselves confronted with a harsh and painful truth. The girl who had simply vanished had been taken, hurt, and buried in darkness. For Emily's family, the agony of not knowing had finally given way to a grim finality, a profound sorrow shadowed by the determination to see justice served. Her parents, despite their grief, stood together with a steadfast resolve, refusing to let Emily's memory fade into silence. The trial of Josh Keller was marked by a relentless unveiling of evidence that left little room for doubt. Prosecutors meticulously reconstructed the timeline, showing how Josh had used their fractured relationship as cruel bait. He had invited Emily under the pretense of a conversation, a chance to mend broken bonds. But behind this facade lay a calculated plan fueled by obsession and rage. When Emily refused to return to him, the fragile veneer shattered. The evidence, especially the chilling footage recovered from Josh's car, captured her final moments in raw detail. Her desperate, muffled screams, the terror etched across her face, and her restrained body as the vehicle sped into isolation. Josh's confession during the trial was a pivotal moment, delivering a grim acknowledgement of guilt that had been absent for so long. He admitted to luring Emily into his car, driven by a volatile mix of anger and desperation. His account described a sudden loss of control, a snap triggered by rejection. In his own words, what followed was an act of rage that extinguished the life of someone he once claimed to care for. His efforts to conceal the crime were methodical, burning her clothing, attempting to destroy physical evidence, and ultimately hiding her remains beneath layers of earth and ash. Yet, despite his efforts, technology and persistent investigation had unraveled his plan, laying bare the truth for all to see. Throughout the trial, the recovered footage served as the prosecution's linchpin, an unyielding piece of digital evidence that told the story of how Emily could no longer speak. From a corrupted and partial file, experts had painstakingly restored the video, revealing a silent yet unmistakable plea for help, the fear in Emily's eyes, and the grim reality of her final moments. The footage was more than just evidence. It was a haunting testament to the urgency of listening to voices often ignored, the silent cries that echo beyond what the world wants to see. Emily's parents used the court's platform to issue a heartfelt statement, transforming personal tragedy into a public call for awareness. They spoke of the dangers lurking behind closed doors, the invisible chains of emotional and psychological abuse, and the importance of recognizing warning signs in young relationships. Their message resonated deeply. Emily's story is a painful reminder that love can sometimes mask danger. We urge families, friends, and communities to pay attention, to believe survivors, and to act before it's too late. Their words carried the weight of loss, but also the hope that future lives might be saved through awareness and education. The case had sparked a broader conversation on domestic violence among young adults, shining a light on a pervasive issue often hidden behind the facade of romance and affection. Campus organizations launched initiatives aimed at providing support and resources, fostering safer environments where students could seek help without fear. Emily's name became synonymous with advocacy, her story inspiring change amid sorrow. The trial concluded with a conviction that brought a measure of justice, but could never restore what was lost. For those who loved Emily, it was a bittersweet victory, justice for a young woman silenced too soon, but a reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can lie beneath ordinary appearances. The case left a lasting imprint on the community, a somber warning of the consequences when cries for help go unheard. In the years that followed, Emily's story was recounted not just as a tragedy, but as a catalyst for awareness and change. The footage, once corrupted and incomplete, became a symbol, a reminder of the power of technology to reveal truth, the importance of vigilance in protecting vulnerable lives, and the need for compassion in a world where silence can be deadly. Emily's final hour, preserved in pixels and memory, serves as a haunting testament to the urgency of listening, believing, and acting. Her legacy is one of both heartbreak and hope, a young life taken too soon, yet a voice that continues to call for justice and protection. The story of Emily Reyes is a stark reminder that behind every missing person is a real human story, filled with fear, love, and the desperate need to be seen. And in telling that story, there is the power to prevent another tragedy, to transform sorrow into strength, and to ensure that no plea for help is ever ignored again.